फ्रेंड्स, मैं मेजर जनरल नीलेंद्र कुमार आज आपसे बात कर रहा हूं पॉडकास्ट में एक किताब के बारे में जो आप देख रहे हैं, माय ओन बॉसवेल, जो कि मेमोइर्स हैं जस्टिस मोहम्मद हिदायतुल्लाह के, जो हिंदुस्तान के चीफ जस्टिस ऑफ इंडिया थे सुप्रीम कोर्ट में, और इसको यूनिवर्सल लॉ पब्लिशिंग कंपनी ने छापा है। तो माय ओन बॉसवेल बाय जस्टिस एम हिदायतुल्लाह अंग्रेज़ी में एक किताब है। मुझे मालूम नहीं कि क्या इसका हिंदी में तर्जुमा अभी तक छपा है या नहीं, हो सकता है कि हो। और उसके पेज 164 से ये 20वां चैप्टर है, वहाँ से आपको पढ़ के सुनाता हूँ। इसका हेडिंग है टू जबलपुर 1 नवंबर 1956। टुमारो टू फ्रेश वुड्स एंड पैस्चर्स नाउ, मिल्टन ने ये कहा है और यहाँ से शुरू होता है, मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ। ऑन 30th October 1956 I left for Bhopal to administer the oath of office to the governor on the stroke of midnight of 31st October 1956 as the governor of the new state of Madhya Pradesh. Immediately afterwards, the governor was to swear in the ministers. Then I was to leave for Jabalpur, 244 miles, travel the whole night by car so that the oath of office could be administered to my new colleagues from Madhya Bharat. This had to be done before noon on the 1st November 1956. Otherwise, there would have occurred a break in their service. The governor had authorized me individually to perform this duty on his behalf. None else was so authorized. The ceremony of the swearing in of our governor was arranged in the council hall at Bhopal. A room was reserved there for him and another for me so that we could robe ourselves. Since the governor was not making any change from his everyday clothes, his room was useless for him. I was especially asked to appear in full judicial robes, full bottomed wig, knee breeches, tufted gown, the lot. I arrived at Bhopal in the afternoon, and after putting my things in order for the night journey to Jabalpur, I went early to the room reserved for me and changed. At 11:40 p.m. I entered the hall in a procession with mace bearers in front. At my back followed other mace bearers and my chopdar in an ostentatious livery matching those of the mace bearers. The chopdar carried my black cap on a cushion in cloth of gold. We climbed 3 steps to a high rostrum, and the mace bearers lined themselves behind an ornamental chair meant for me. Opposite me was another ornamental chair, a shade bigger than mine. It was meant for the governor. When I entered the hall, the audience stood up. Just under the rostrum sat the ministers on chairs in 2 rows. They did not stand up. As I passed them, I gave them a withering look, and some of them scrambled to their feet in the front row, followed by all the others, till only the chief minister was felt seated. But as all his ministers were standing, he just raised himself a couple of inches from his chair and sat down. My entry was followed by that of governor to the strains of the national anthem. Now the whole ceremony was being photographed and also filmed. Flash bulbs were popping all over the place and floodlights were switched on. The governor held the program before his face and thus did not allow his face to be photographed. He ruined the solemnity of the occasion. But he was always doing this. Once in a ceremonial parade, when inspecting a guard of honor, he stopped in the middle to shake out an offending stone from his elbowed slipper. The governor came to the dais and sat down, and the chief secretary announced the commencement of the proceedings. I stood up, and so did the governor. A special lamp was placed for him to read the oath. I began to administer the oath to him, he repeating the words after me. I was only halfway through when suddenly the governor shouted at the top of his voice, "Stop this! How do you expect me to read the words if you blind me with your flashes?" Or words to the same effect. All the lights were switched off by the photographers. The place suddenly looked quite mucky. The whole ceremony was ruined. The problem for me was whether to begin the oath afresh or to let the remarks be treated as a theatrical aside or to let them go in as part of the oath. I decided that after all it was his oath and not mine, and if I began again he would probably resent it or enter into an argument or start something else, and more unnecessary and irrelevant words would embellish the simple oath. So I began the oath where it was interrupted and completed the ceremony. The procession reformed and we left in the reverse order. The governor did not need to change back into other clothes, and so the party scrambled into their cars and left for the government house, where I followed after I had changed into my travelling clothes. It seems that in the meantime the ministers had been sworn in. When I reached government house there was a tense atmosphere and an icy silence. The governor and the chief minister sat apart and did not exchange a word in my presence. I was about to wish them good night and leave for Jabalpur when a terrible storm with torrential rain and thunder and lightning broke. It had been drizzling for some time and there were heavy clouds, but nothing like this was expected. The heavens seemed to have opened and the rain fell in a deluge. I had to leave immediately if I was to cover the 244 miles and reach Jabalpur by about 10 a.m. There was concern for me on all sides. The governor suggested that I go by plane, but the pilot declined to take off, and I am right glad that he did. I suggested telephoning my senior colleague, Justice V.R. Sain, to authorize him to administer the oath, but the telephone had gone dead. The wireless was equally useless. It did not occur to us to try a special train. The situation was complicated further when the Inspector General of Police reported that a gang of dacoits was in the neighborhood of Raisen, a distance of about 20 miles from Bhopal. But I had to start. I left behind the mace bearers and the props of the very unsatisfactory ceremony we had gone through. It was arranged that a jeep was to go ahead of my car, carrying soldiers with automatic weapons. A pickup van was to follow with more armed constables. In my car I was to have a standby driver, my deputy registrar and myself. The governor asked me if I was afraid to go through the dacoit-infested area. I answered no, and added, who knows, I may qualify for an award which is set on the head of the leader of this gang. The rain came down with redoubled vigor. The road to Raisen was all right, but thereafter it was a sheet of water in which the jeep was picking its way by watching the trees, hedges and other landmarks. We were following close to the jeep. The progress was so slow that we were not doing more than 10 miles per hour, if even that. After we passed Raisen and entered the jungles, the vehicles were kept very close together. After a time, we saw the headlights of a car which was following us and also overtaking us. The pickup van stopped and so did the car and jeep. The jeep did a U-turn and barred the way of the approaching car. My deputy registrar, he is now a judge of the High Court, then made a very bright remark. He said, this may be an ambush. No honest person will be out on a night like this. He had apparently forgotten that his Chief Justice and he himself were abroad that night. The car soon overtook us and was stopped by the armed constables. It turned out to be a car sent by the administration to replace the one in which we were travelling. It was said that the replacement car was more reliable. I had a suspicion that the car we were using was one of the governor's special cars. It was a big limousine with lots of room and a heater. The one sent to us was a small car with no heating arrangement. To transfer to the other car in binding rain, standing ankle deep in water and slush with a temperature of about 10 degrees centigrade was some experience. Our luggage was shifted in the rain. Why was this not thought of earlier was not known. However, we sat in the small car, wet and shivering with our shoes full of water. The rain continued. I kept up a running conversation with the driver so that he might not fall asleep at the wheel. There was now no additional driver also. My deputy registrar, who shared the back seat with me, would doze in his own corner and sometimes fall on my shoulder. He would then wake up and with apologies with an unnecessary profusion of my lord, and your lordship would straighten in his corner and begin the whole thing over again. Morning broke when we reached Sagar with half the distance covered. The rain did not stop, but it was much less, and the road and visibility improved. We tried to get in touch with Jabalpur on the phone but failed. I gave the drivers of the 3 vehicles 45 minutes to make their ablution and have some tea, and we started again. I had obtained a second car which was to follow us so that in case of a breakdown, we would not be delayed. At this time, my wife, the Jabalpur bar and the gentry were puzzled. They had no news about us and the judges were in a panic. Contact had been lost with the towns en route, and they did not know whether we were on the road or washed away by floods or murdered by the dacoits or had a breakdown. The only hope was that we had not started at all. The inauguration of the new High Court was fixed at 10:30 a.m. and the entire bar and the gentry of Jabalpur had gathered in the High Court. They waited and there was no news of the Chief Justice. At about 11:15, we reached the Circuit House. A more tired, sleepy and dirty Chief Justice could not be imagined. There was no time to shave, bathe and change and go to the High Court to swear in my new colleagues. I called them to the Circuit House, and having lined them up in the hall, I gave them oath of office. I sent them back to the High Court with my apologies and assurance that I would attend as soon as possible. Feverishly, I began to get ready. I tore one pair of knee breeches in my haste to get into them. The spare one was too loose. It was bought second-hand from Justice Gruner, who had bought it from yet another judge. I got into them and added braces to keep them up. Just as I was getting out of the car at the High Court, I found that the buttons of the braces had sprung. I discarded the useless braces in my chambers, and there was nothing else to do except to put my hands in the pocket to hold up the breeches. I did so and entered the courtroom in full robes. Damn braces, bless relaxes, said Blake. Damn braces, wear belt, quipped Bernard Shaw. Shaw was right. The ceremony was colorful. The place was full to overflowing. The Advocate General, the Presidents of the Bar Council and the Bar Association read out their speeches. I realized that I had left my written speech in the pocket of the breech number 1. So I made an impromptu speech. The usual rounds of congratulations and handshaking followed. I shook hands with no one, and this was noticed. What was not noticed was that I refused tea and eatables also. An embarrassing situation arose when the wife of the brigadier, officer commanding of the area, and Mrs. Dubey, the wife of the local member of parliament, came up. The wife of the brigadier, a charming tall lady, stretched both her hands saying, "Congratulations and welcome to Jabalpur." I thanked her but ignored the double handshake. She seemed a little upset. It seemed that this was taken as an insult to the Indian Army as a whole. The brigadier called on me the next day, and after the usual courtesies, brought up the subject with a mild protest, whether on a personal level or on behalf of the army. I did not try to find out. I told him the reason, and he laughed and said that I should give him permission to narrate this in the officers' mess. I agreed, and I asked him to carry my apologies to his lady with the message, "I cannot wait to shake hands with such a lovely person." And thus began my 25 months at Jabalpur. Thank you.